you very much. I'd like to begin by, first of all, thank you for putting this debate on. Thank you for inviting me to speak. I think it's a really important issue. I'd not been to Durham before, and it's a really lovely place. You guys have got a chair here, so thank you for the invite. You look like a good set of Liberal students. I hope you all are. So I thought I'd make myself immediately popular by quoting from everyone's favourite president, George W. Bush. But he makes a quite important distinction on this, which I think it's important we get out of the way early. George Bush said in 2005, the United States has no right, no desire, and no intention to impose our form of government on anyone else. That is one of the main differences between us and our enemies. They seek to impose and expand an empire of oppression in which a tiny group of brutal, self-appointed rulers control every aspect of every life. Our aim is to build and preserve a community of free and independent nations with governments that answer to their citizens and reflect their own cultures. Now, as I'm sure you all know, Bush isn't especially renowned for his eloquence, but I think that sums it up pretty well. I think he's onto something there. I would quote another notorious right-wing hawk, President Obama, from a speech in September at the UN. He said, "Freedom, justice and peace for the world must begin with freedom, justice and peace in the lives of individual human beings. We stand up for universal values because it's the right thing to do. But we also know from experience that those who defend these values for their people have been our closest friends and allies, while those who have denied those rights, whether terrorist groups or tyrannical governments, have chosen to be our adversaries." Pick any president in recent US history and you'll find a pretty similar rhetoric. It's a consistent theme in foreign policy for the US. And I think largely they're onto something. I think they've got it right. It's our job. It's the job of free nations, particularly rich and powerful free nations, which the US certainly is, and the UK, the rich and powerful, I think, we're increasingly diminishing, but it's the job to help other people. It's a duty and it's a responsibility. It's what makes great nations great nations. But the good news for those of you wanting to vote against the motion tonight is that I don't think this is an especially popular thing to think anymore. Military budgets are being slashed here and abroad, and this is likely to be a debate that remains in the academic sphere for the time being. But we often assume imposition, as the title says, the assertion of democracy needs to be by force. As Alan has alluded to earlier, it absolutely does not need to be. Rights can be spread by confident example. I give the example of the Soviet Union. Look at the collapse of the Soviet Union, where no military battle ever took place. And obviously there's a host of reasons why that collapsed, but look at the confidence projected by Jimmy Carter versus Ronald Reagan. One a defeatist president, the other who genuinely believed the Soviet Union would fall if they were proud about spreading freedom and their values. So this can be a soft power issue as well. It's clearly important. The UK spends over $9 billion a year in international aid, and international aid itself, the Department for International Development, has been ring-fenced entirely in UK spending cuts when everything else is being slashed hugely. But inevitably there comes a time when soft power isn't enough, and inevitably there is a time when you will use hard power. It wasn't soft power that stopped Nazism. It wasn't soft power that stopped North Korean expansion in 1953. It wasn't soft power that stopped Milosevic. It wasn't even really soft power in Northern Ireland, where we only got to the table because of a position of strength there with the IRA so deeply infiltrated, so operationally incapable that they had to be brought to the table. Sometimes rights need to be spread by force, and I'll give you the perfect example of Afghanistan. What's the alternative after 9/11 to what we've done in Afghanistan? As Alan said, this is a necessity, a necessary war from a security point of view. But out of the many options they had, and there were a plethora, but to me the three most common ones, was you could have allowed training camps to stay there and use drones, missile strikes, essentially the US policy in the 90s with Sudan in 1998, for example, in response to the embassy bombings in Kenya and Tanzania. We could have done that, but it didn't work before. You could invade Afghanistan and install a strongman, empower the warlords. But are we really morally comfortable with getting rid of one dictatorship just to install another one? Or you could go and try and make this society into something perhaps imperfect, but also something approaching society in which you may be able to live, where you would want to live, where there is an open vote, where there's freedom of speech, where there's the rule of law, where women aren't stoned to death for being raped. where girls can go to school. 6 million Afghans now in school, 2 million of them girls. Unimaginable under the Taliban. So I think if you're going to go into these countries from a national security point of view, like in Afghanistan, you absolutely have a moral duty to impose democracy there. Democracies respect their own people. Democracies respect their neighbours. They don't start wars with other democracies, as Alan has mentioned. Now, I'm sure people on the opposition side may call this imperialism. I think it's an expression of universal values, freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. Because after all, if we don't spread our values, if we're not confident in them, if we don't assert them, who will?